Bienvenidos, and welcome to my channel. I've been a fan of D&D for a very long time, and beyond the very cool dice, great storytelling, and imaginary worlds, I fell in love with the miniatures. I painted my first minis around that time, and have been painting them ever since. So follow along with my channel, and see if this old dog gamer can learn some new tricks. And now, episode 41, Dragonlance, the ending of the beginning of the end. Continuing with my work on the TPK Temple, there were still some candles and skulls to finish painting, so the marathon continues. You know, I'm thankful for being an old man. I'm living in a time where 3D printers are accessible at a reasonable cost. I'm living in a time where paint has been painstakingly updated to match the needs of the hobby. I'm living in a time where 10-year-old me can finally realize our dreams. When I first started, here's the old man part, the only paints I had access to were the Tester brand enamel paints that only cleaned up with thinner. I knew nothing about primer, thinning paint, coverage, shading, highlights, dry brushing, all the techniques I've learned over the years. Did I care? Well, yes and no. Let me explain. Yes, I cared because humans like to take pride in their creativity, and I knew it wasn't my best work. No, I didn't care because I didn't know any of those things existed. You can't really miss what you didn't know. But there is one thing that has never changed: my enjoyment of painting miniatures. Since the beginning, it was the minis that sealed the deal for my love of D&D. Finding new and exciting minis to use in my game was always the draw for me at the game stores on the weekends. Saving up for a new book actually took a back seat to saving up for new minis and paint. As I grew older, I found it difficult to find a group of players, so my painting interests had shifted from minis to models. Model cars, model planes, helicopters, even Robotech models were my creative outlets through junior high school and beyond. My taste ranged from muscle cars to European sports cars. 1984 Lamborghini Countach was my favorite. Now mind you, I wasn't very good, but I always got better with time, and that was really the point. I learned dry brushing and weathering techniques from building models of tanks and old trucks, which I was able to transfer over for when I did dioramas and eventually miniatures. I remember one series in particular that I really enjoyed collecting and assembling. For a time during the 80s, Revell Models had a license to release a series of Robotech models. From the iconic Valkyries to the unique support units in the Defender series, I was able to get a decent amount of the collection, including the SDF-1. I was just using the box art as a painting guide for all of it, so I wasn't that familiar with the series. Hey, I was a Star Blazers kid, cut me some slack. In that series were diorama pieces that showed the mechs in the factory ready for deployment. The small details on those were amazing, and I looked everywhere I could find it for all of them. I was even able to get the ginormous model simply called Robotech Factory. While my family was on a vacation, we stopped at a large mall, and I remember KB Toys had a bunch of the Robotech Factory models in a large display up front. In total KB style, the model was drastically marked down. I don't remember what I paid, but I know it was cheap, well, at least for me. Now my problem was trying to get it home. We were traveling in the family BFB, that's big Buick, and the trunk was already filled with the luggage. So, since I bought it, I had to find a place for it to go in the car. Now, despite being a BFB, the back seat wasn't as big as you'd think, so I had to squeeze it back in there with me. Seriously, the box was almost 2 feet long. While I did manage to get it home, suffering and all, I could not wait to get it started. Once I was able to get a closer look, I was hooked and I wanted to spend as much time as I could working on it. It was my first experience with a large size, yet smaller scale model, let alone in diorama form. I assembled the model slowly, making sure each piece fit snugly. Once assembly was completed, it was time to start painting. Using the box art as a guide again, I was going to transform the giant piece of gray plastic into something wonderful. By then I had found better brushes, not by much, but easier to work with. But I was still using the tester brand paints that were a mess to use and a nightmare to clean up. I took my time painting the Mini. I wanted every little detail to be noticed, but I wasn't exactly sure how to make that happen, so I kind of muddled through. I didn't primer the model since it was molded in gray, and that was the main color of the piece, so I left it alone. Today, I would have painted the pieces before final assembly, but I didn't know that was a thing at the time. The painting took a long time. I had to save up for colors I needed, and my choices of colors were pretty limited then. So that added a lot of time to the project. But it turned out pretty good, at least from what I remember. I had a shelf it fit on perfectly, and I even added a light so it could be seen easier. I remember the level of satisfaction I had after completing the piece. It had been the biggest piece I had ever done, and I was very proud of myself. Backseat leg cramps were worth it. Thankfully, that feeling never goes away. I still get it when a big project comes together. For my current project, TPK Temple, I'm looking forward to the time when I get to unveil the project to my players. My skills with foam core are pretty sad, so my primary focus is on the interior details, the printing and painting of the set pieces. When it is all ready and done, I promise I'll take pictures and video of the final confrontation so everyone gets to see the project. I went with pallid bone speed paint for the skulls. I've always liked how contrast paint looks with both bone and wood, so it's my go-to for skulls. For the candles, I decided to go with a light tone quick shade in a mess around and find out moment, and I'm glad I did. Using this tone of shade with the pale sand war paint is apparently a fantastic combo if you want the beeswax look, or at least that's what it looked like to me. I was still having issues with the camera overheating and was waiting on the delivery of my heat sink cooling fan, so there's no footage of me using the shade. Which is why we've skipped ahead to me painting the flame on the candles before I hit the whole thing with a matte finish. The final touch to the wall is a layer of stick-on felt, so they won't slide around with the tiles. I do plan to use the walls in future encounters, so I wanted to make them durable. Well, I guess that's it for this episode. Psych! This episode is too short, and the TPK Temple isn't completely ready to show. So, how about a good-sized sneak peek at the last paint project I have for Dragonlance? This is a greater death dragon. It's an undead abomination created by Lord Soth himself. I used speed paint for the base colors, which were painted months ago and accidentally not filmed. The piece is called Ghost Dragon from the Cripple God Foundry, purchased through myminifactory.com, and the link will be in the description. Working on the cataclysmic flames that emanate from the dragon's corpse, I tried a similar technique I used on the torch for Lord Soth's mini. Finding the lightest purple in the range, I filled the recesses with Kraken Lavender war paint to show the brightest parts of the flames. I was not as steady-handed as I have been in the past, but I knew it didn't matter, as I could fix that with the application of the primary color. After the flame recesses were covered to my satisfaction, I moved on to the skulls that are woven into flames throughout the dragon. It makes for a nice and spooky touch. I wanted the skulls to have a different shade of purple to contrast from the dark purple of the flames, so I went with Diabolic Plum War Paint. While covering the skulls, I was starting to like the contrast to the purples enough to make it the new primary for the flames as well. While I do enjoy painting my minis, that wasn't always the case. For a while, when 3rd edition came out, I was only buying the pre-painted random packs of minis. Painting is time-consuming, and I never seemed to have enough time no matter what. During that time, I picked up a lot of pre-painted minis, and I thought I was set for life. I may have been set for a long time on minis, but they're just like dice. You can never have enough. Eventually, the painting bug came back, and I was starting to repaint some of the minis to match my game needs. This was the beginning of my true plunge into the mini painting hobby. At first, the painting was fine, a little touch up here, complete repaint there, but I found myself wanting more. It's about that time I picked up a new video game, Space Marine for PlayStation 3. I played the crap out of that game, but my favorite were the orcs. The more I played the game, the more interested I became in the tabletop game. My son was just about the right age to play with me, so we bought the Assault on Blackreach box set and split it. I, of course, took the orcs, and for the Space Marines, my son did some research and decided to make his chapter into Blood Angels. That was it, the moment where my son and I went neck deep into 40K and mini painting. I managed to find a DVD showing painting techniques specifically for Blackreach, and we watched it over and over until we felt comfortable trying to paint our minis. I invested in some Citadel paints and brushes and gave it a shot. With what we had learned on the video in mind, I started to batch paint my orcs and my son his Blood Angels. At first I was not happy with the results, but eventually I learned about the "it looks like shit" phase, and I knew to stick with it. For those of you who have painted any minis, you know what I'm talking about. There's a point in time, somewhere after the base coat, but before the detail work, where adding layers and transitions make the model look horrible. It happens on most minis. You get a certain point where the mini is off from what you had in mind, but it's still getting there. At first I was wanting to give up, but I trust the process I learned and kept with it. As with most of my minis, the more time I spent cleaning up the lines, the better it looked. After I was done, I was amazed at the results. With a newfound vigor, I tackled the rest of the minis from the box, and we were playing 40K for the first time. As the years went on, I bought more and more minis, building up my army of orcs, and soon I had more minis than I could paint. The thought of completing my orc army, as well as the Dark Angel army I started up, yeah, I'm an idiot. It became too overwhelming with all the issues in my life at the time, so they got set aside. But the painting is not the main reason for setting aside the game. Games Workshop has a habit of pumping out new rules so often it was no longer financially viable to keep up. The pile of outdated rules was getting larger, so we stopped playing. While I would love to get back into painting my army, currently I have no plans to start up with Warhammer 40K anytime soon, but when I do, you'll be the first to know. But before I get back to painting my orcs, however, I'm going to have to start with the Paint Your Own Orc Mech action figure that my son gave me for a few years ago for my birthday. It's a massive piece, and I've only painted large-scale models once or twice, so I will need to hone my techniques before I tackle that project. I can't decide to paint him as is, or take the risk and disassemble him to make it easier. If anyone has experience with this, I'd be happy to hear your advice. Using the Purple Swarm speed paint as a base brought the war paint to the perfect level. But more on that next episode. I hope you enjoyed my little video. I'm always trying to fine-tune my content, so any constructive criticism is welcome in the comments below. I try to put forth an episode every 2 to 3 weeks, so hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out when it drops. Hitting the like button is a great way to help me grow my channel, as does sharing the video on your favorite social media. Remember, they ain't gonna paint themselves.